You didn't go to the Levaya, did you?
Again?
You didn't go to the Levaya, did you?
No, I watched it on live stream. Okay, so we're going to look at the Mishnah here on Daf Chav. Emir Hashem.
Okay.
You have it?
Yeah.
Klal Amru B'Yevamot. So now they're going to break down the categories of different kinds of arayos or isurim that aren't arayos into various categories, subcategories. So the first category is kolshi isur ereva. So that's the 15 arayos listed in the first Mishnah. Lo choletzes velo misyabemes. There's no chalitza, no yibum, which means that there is no nefila for yibum at all, because it's an ereva situation. And as far as the tzara is concerned, she likewise is of the same status as the ereva herself. No chalitza, no yibum. And that's the principle called arayos potros b'yibum. No requirement of chalitza. And that's how we pass. Now we get to the next category, which is a lower kind of an isur. We're talking about a case where the Yevamot is asura ala yavam, but not with an isur kares. It's not an ereva situation, but it is isur mitzvah. That's one category. And another category is the isur kedusha. So in those cases of isur mitzvah and isur kedusha, the halach is choletzes velo misyabemes. So what's the difference between, what do they mean by isur mitzvah and isur kedusha? So the case of isur mitzvah is a case where Shimon marries Sarah, who is related to Reuven as a krova d'Rabbanan, which is called shnios larayos. Shimon dies, and his wife Sarah falls for yibum to Reuven, and the relationship between Sarah and Reuven is that of shnios larayos. So it's only an erva d'Rabbanan. And then we have a case of isur kedusha, where again Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Shimon marries Sarah, and now we're talking about an isur lap. Like, for example, Sarah is a mamzeres. So Shimon dies, and Sarah falls for yibum to Reuven. So in the first case, we're dealing with an isur krova midin shnias larais. In the second case, we're dealing with an isur lap, but not erva, not kares. And in both of these categories, the Mishnah paskins choletzes velo misyabemes, meaning there is a zikas yibum, but we're not going to allow for yibum. So as a result of that zika, the Yevamah, we called her Sarah in this case, is stuck. She has nowhere to go except to receive chalitza, because without chalitza she can't marry anyone. There is a zika. On the other hand, she cannot be misyabemes. So the only option for her is chalitza. Okay. Now, what happens in the case where two Yevamos fall for yibum to the same person from two different brothers? In other words, both brothers were married and died without children. And there's a third brother. So that's going to be a case of shtei Yevamos, mishnei achim, and they both fall for yibum to Levi. Now, Reuven and Shimon married Rachel and Leah respectively. That means two brothers married two sisters. Now, when these two sisters fall for yibum to Levi with the death of both Reuven and Shimon, then we have what's called, and this is all D'Rabbanan, achos zikukaso. Each one of these two girls, Rachel and Leah, are called achos zikukaso, which is a psul D'Rabbanan. And once again, we're going to apply the principle of choletzes v'lo misyabemes, because the psul is only D'Rabbanan. It cannot undermine the zika. She would not be able to get married to anyone in Ashuk unless she gets chalitza. But on the other hand, Yibum we cannot allow because of achos kukas. So this is radically different than what we had before, where you had two Yevamos that fell from the same husband, from the same brother, and one of them was an Erva. In that case, neither of them required neither chalitza nor yibum. But here we have two wives falling for yibum to Levi, the third brother. Those two wives are sisters. And in that case, we have an Iser called achos kukaso midrabanan, and that's going to make it impossible for yibum to take place. But chalitza she must have. Achosa she yevimta choletzes o misyabemes. So in the case of achosa, what we have is that okay, he has a diagram, just 1 second. So let's see, he has a case here of Rachel and Leah's sisters. Rachel has a daughter named Sarah. Sarah gets married to Ruvain. Ruvain has two other brothers, Shimon and Levi. And Shimon now marries Rachel. And Rachel, who's the mother of Sarah, is now the mother-in-law of Ruvain, who married Sarah. So Shimon married Ruvain's mother-in-law, Sarah. Levi married her sister Leah. And Shimon and Levi died without children. So their wives fall for Yibum to Ruvain. Rachel, again, is the mother-in-law of Ruvain. So she's completely excluded from Chalitza and Yibum. But her sister Leah is Yevimta Shenofeles Yachad Ima Liyibum Lifnei Ruvain. And therefore, O Choletzes O Misyabemes. Vishe'ena Asur al Ruvain Mishum Achos Kukaso, Shari Rachel Achosa Enos Kuko. So if the sister of, right, that two sisters fall for Yibum, but one sister is an Erva, in this case Kaloso, then it's no longer a case of Shnei Yevamim and Achos Kukasa, because we can't call it Achos Kukasa unless it's a Zikas Yibum. In this case, she's an Erev of Kala, and therefore cannot be a Zikas Yibum. Now, Iser Mitzvah, the Mishnah now explains, we already had this explanation, Chnios, Midirei Sofrim. And in a case where the Yevama is Asur al Ayava, Midirei Sofrim, then the halach is Choletzes v'lo misyabemes. The Iser Kedusha, what would be the case of an Iser Kedusha? We mentioned the case of Mamzeres. We also have another case of Almana L'Kohen Gadol, which is what's called a Lav Habamachal essay, because the Torah says, Hu Isha Bipsuleh Yikach. And Grusha V'Chalutza L'Kohen Edge, that's already an Isser Lav. or mamzeres and nesin Yisrael is an isola. And then additionally, we have bas Yisrael lenosin ulamams. So in that last case, the avera, or shall we say the psul yuchsin, is in the yavam, not in the yevamot. Gemara says klal. Whenever we see the word klal in a Mishnah, we know lasuye is coming to include something. What's it coming to include? Omar Rafram Bar Papa, lasuye tsoras islanders. Ukiravasi. So Rav Asi is quoted back on Daf Yud Beis, and he's of the opinion that islandess is not only Pturim and Ayibum, but she patters up Hatzara from Yibum and Chalitza. How does that work? And it works as follows. Since islandess is excluded from Yibum under the halach of Asher Teled Prat La'inus Shelo Yechola, islandess Shelo Yechola Leholid, now she, the islandess, goes back to be an Eishes Ach, the original status of Ereva. And she's going to patter up Hatzara. The Ika Diamri, others say that the word klal in our Mishnah is kol she'isura iser erva hu dasira tzarasa. Ha lo isura iser erva tzarasa lo asira. So now we're coming to the exact opposite conclusion in the Lishna Basra, and we're explaining that the only isur on the tzara applies when you have a real erva. So the Isser Erev of one of the two Yevamos, one of the two Saros, now contagiously invalidates the Tzara. But now we have the case of islandess. So Rafram says that limute tzaras islandess, that the tzar of an islandess is muteres liyibu, which is the exact opposite conclusion against Rabbi Asi. And we're being medayik now from the fact that it says kol isur isur erva hu di asrei tzarasa, implying that if it wasn't an isur erva, then eno asura al tzarasa. And that's against Ravasi. Ravasi says that the tzara of an islandess is p'tura min hayibu min hachalitza. Now we're saying no. That a tzaras islandess is lo asira. So again, let's go over the two Lashonos here in our Mishnah, explaining our Mishnah of Klal. According to the first Mishnah, the word Klal is a ribui to include Saras Islands. And she's P'tura min hayibu min hachalitza. not under the law of erva, but kidarav as. So when the islandess is an erva, then she patters up hatzara min hayibum achalitza. But here in this case, the Yevamot is an islandess. She's not. She's not an erva. So she's excluded from Yibum and Chalitz because of the pasuk Asher Teled. She's not capable of Leda. And now this would support Rav Asi that an islandess patters up Atzara mi Yibum v'Chalitza. Now, what that really means is that since the islandess is excluded from Yibum, she goes back to the original status as an HSA. And Memela, she has the status, this islandess, of an Erva, which Erva of HSA. And an Erva patters up Hatzar. In the second Lishna, we're excluding Ravas. And it means that the Tsaras islandess falls for Yibum and Chalitza. So it's not that the Lishna Basra is denying that an islandess is Ashes Ach, but what we're saying is that she's out of the entire parsha of Yibum. When do we say that it's that an Erva patters up Hatzara? That's because the Erva, like the Tzara, is in the parsha of Yibum. But in the case of islandess, we're not in the parsha of Yibum at all.
Okay.
So that means that the Tzara of an islandess is Chayeves B'Yibum. Mishnah says, Achosa hi shehi yevimto, choletzes o misyabemes. So the Gemara asks, Achosa deman. When you say choletzes o misyabemes, whose sister is she? Ilema, the Isur mitzvah. If you're talking about an Isur d'Rabbanan, is Keva de Midaraisa Ramya Kamei Paga Biachos Kukosu Ben HaTorah. In other words, Nachos Kukoso is only a d'Rabbanan. And therefore, on a Doraisa level, she falls for Yibum. That's called Isur Mitzvah. Nimtzak shu miyabe mesachosa paga biachos kukosa min haTorah. What does that mean? Again, if it's achosa of the Yevamot, and we're equating now achos kukasa with shnios larayos, it's all the Rabbanon. Therefore, she needs chalitza. So on a doraisa level, paga be'achos kukasa. So we cannot assume that achosa means achosa shel Yevamot. That would not be an Isur mitzvah. Again, we had a case of an Isur mitzvah that was shnius larayos. Now we're talking about achosa shel Yevamot. That's an Isur achos kukasa. So Kevin to be the Raisa Ramya Kameh. Again, even though this Yevama is Asura Midin Achos Kukaso on a Darabana level, but on a Doraisa level, she's not Asura. So what does it mean? Paga b'achos kukasa. We just finished saying that achos kukaso was like Isur mitzvah, like Shnius Larayos, and it's only the Rabbanan. So what does this mean? Paga b'achos kukasa. Do you have any notes on this by any chance?
I don't think I have anything here.
Nothing?
One sec.
All right, so we'll have to come back to this a little bit later, Amir Tashem.
Just one sec. I do have one note that states the Zuka's sister is normally forbidden to the Yavam. So the Gemara is arguing that since she's prohibited by mitzvah, since Yevamot is biblically permitted to the Yavam, so it's Doraisa and is bound to Minzika. In this specific case, cannot be where she's prohibited because of sanctity, because she also is Doraisa, eligible for Yibum and bound to the Yavam and Zika. Okay, very confusing.
How does he translate the words "paga be'achos kukos"? Just simply translation.
He will encounter the sister of his biblical skuka.
Because on a Doraisa level, there's no Isra Achos Kukosa. So if she's the Achosa of the Yevama, so b'Doraisa Ramya Kameh. In other words, there's an Afila for Yibum b'Doraisa. Okay, fine. So therefore, Paga be'achos kukoso, if he's miyabim the sister, then that's achos kukoso. Usually he gives you a little diagram. Let's see if there's any diagram here.
Yeah, I don't have a diagram. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Let me just read to you what he writes here. And we touched on this earlier. Naflu loli adam, shtei yevamos mishnei ach echav chemesu, vehein achios. Shtei nasur salad mirabanon, v'yibu mishum isra achos kukas, v'arehein choltzos lo misyabnos. V'einte el chekol achas b'fnei atzma hoysu muteres lo liyibu. Ilu naflo levada. Avalim achas men asur lo mitzvah ervo kagon shi kaloso o chamoso is achoso shi yevimta choletzes o misyabemis. So that's what the Gemara concludes here. Ela achosa de iser ervo. And therefore, she falls for Yibum, and she's not considered Achos Kukaso because the other sister, who's an Erva, doesn't fall for Yibum at all. That's not the halach of Tsaros, because in Tsaros you have an Erva plus another woman who's married to the same man. Here we're talking about two sisters that are married to two brothers. So achosa deman ilema de iser mitzvah if we're going to say that achosa It's not an Isur Erva, but only an Isur Mitzvah. Which means an Erva Midivrei Sofrim, let's say. Is came under the Midoraisa Ram Yakameh. Is Poga Bachos Kukaso Minator. So therefore, there couldn't be a possibility of Yibum. So again, it's a little confusing because it says Paga b'chos kupasu min Torah. I don't think that he means that min Torah she cannot have Yibum. I think he's saying that it's a chos kupasu on a doraisa level. Why? Because the achos falls for Yibum midoraisa, even though she's a surah, but that's only an Isur mitzvah, and an Isur mitzvah means an Isur drabanan, and that doesn't undermine the zikas Yibum. So as far as the other sister is concerned, there could not be Yibum because it is achos kukasa. See, the Gemara's final maskana is that you could have Yibum because it's not really achos kukasa because she's a full-fledged erva, the sister. And therefore she doesn't even fall for Yibum. So the achos is not considered achos kukasa. But before that, in the Havamid of the Gemara entertains the possibility that we're talking about an Isur mitzvah, that the achotza is only an Isur erva. And that means that she really falls for Yibum on a Doraisa level, but Doraisa Ram Yameh. And therefore the two sisters are falling for Yibum simultaneously in front of the third brother. Or in front of the second brother, for that matter. So that's called the real achos kukasa min Torah. Meaning on a doraisa level, they're both kukos, both sisters, because we're only dealing with an erev of shnios larayos. So how can you tell me in the Mishnah choletzes omis yabemes? It can't be omis yabemes because since there's a din of achos kukaso on a doraisa level, therefore, as far as Yibum is concerned, Yibum is not a possibility. So how can the Mishnah say achosa she yevimta choletzes o misyabemes? That can only make sense if the achos was a full-fledged erva, not a drabanan of shnios, but a real karechi of kares. And that would undermine her status as a zakuk of omenes. She doesn't have a status of zika. And therefore the achos is on her own. She's totally independent. And therefore choletzes o misyabemes. Okay. Now the Mishnah says, Isur mitzvah shnios. Amai korile Isur mitzvah Abaye mitzvah l'shmo l'divrei chacham. So in all the cases of shnios, we're just following in the mandate of the chachamim, and therefore we call it Isur mitzvah. Mitzvah meaning mitzvah l'shmo l'divrei chacham. Isur kedusha. Almana l'kohen gadol grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedjot. So these are basically lavim doraisa, although almana l'kohen gadol is a lav haba v'chal eseh. So v'amai korele Isur kedusha what is the terminology? Isur Kedusha, how is it appropriate here? Tichsiv Kedoshim Yu Leilochecha. In the laws that are written in Vayikra, Paragraph Aleph, which is Parshas Kedoshim, and it says Kedoshim Yu Leilokechem, that's called Kahuna, and the Isuri Kahuna are a result and generated by the Kedushas Kahuna. So we call all Isuri Kahuna Isure Kedusha, because the Kohen is on a high level of Kedusha, and that's what generates his Isur. Tanya, we learned in the Brayso of Yehuda Machlif Isur Mitzvah. He switches the names over here. Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedja. That's called Isur Mitzvah. V'amai kori le'Isur Mitzvah. So Rabbi Yehuda is now switching things around. So Isur Mitzvah can no longer be identified according to Rabbi Yehuda as we did according to the Chachamim, namely it's the Rabbanon, but rather it's Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen hedja, which is the Doraisa. So now the question comes back to haunt us: Amai kori le'Isur Mitzvah? And the Gemara says the Chsiv Eile HaMitzvos. There's a pasuk at the end of Sefer Vayikra, and it says Eile HaMitzvos asher tziva Hashem es Moshe el bnei Yisrael b'Har Sinai. And that's a reference to all the dinim of kahuna that are written in Sefer Dvar. All the dinim of kahuna that are written in Sefer Vayikra. So since the pasuk starts with Eila Mitzvahs, therefore we use the terminology Isurei Mitzvah to refer to Isurei Kahuna. Isur Kedusha Shnios B'divrei Sofer. V'amai kari le'Isur Kedusha Amar Abaye Kol Makayim Divrei Chacham Nikur Kadosh. Amalei Rava says to Abaye, from your interpretation, it sounds like someone who's not Makayim Dirabbanons, he's not called a Kadosh. That doesn't make any sense. V'chol she'eino Makayim Divrei Chachamim Kadosh hu d'lo mikri. Okay, you don't want to call him a Kadosh. I would say Rasha Nami Lo Mikri. Certainly he's a Rasha. So to say he's a Kedusha, meaning he's not a Kadosh, when he's a real Rasha, so someone who violates the Rabbanans consistently is lacking in the shame Kadosh. That's not true. He's a Rasha. Elama Rava, what's the etymology, the meaning of Isur Kedusha? Based on a pasuk in Dvarim Yudalit, Yam Kadosh Hashem L'Shem Elokecha, Kadesh Atzmecha B'Mutar Lecha. So, for example, Shnias Larayos would be a case of Kadesh Atzmecha B'Mutar Lecha, and that's Ki Am Kadosh Hatol Hashem Elokecha. You make a harchaka. Now the Mishnah says Almana l'kohen gadol. That's choletzes v'yena misyabemis. Excuse me. Kapasik v'tani. The Tana of our Mishnah says an absolute rule with no exceptions, that almana is not misyabemis lekoin gadol. Loshna min anesuin v'loshna min eiris. Bishleim almana min anesuin sheinena bisula alohi asura olav bi'esek behu isha b'psuleo yika. That's in Vayikra Chafal. Ubel taseh. It says almana lo yikach. So she's asura liyibu. So that's the case of almana min anesuin. Even though there's a mitzvah of yibum, but the mitzvah of yibum cannot be docha both a lo taseh and an esek. Ella almana min erisin. Why is yibum excluded in that case? He's not violating the essay of ki im besula me'amov. She's still a besula. It's only been an eris, so they didn't have any active intimacy. So then what are we left with? Lo saseh greda. We don't have the additional essay of who isha b'psuleo yika. Is yavo essay v'yidcha lo taseh? Why can't the essay of yibum trump the lo taseh of almana lo yikach? Amarav Gidol Amarav. And we're talking now about almana min erisin l'kohen gadol. Is Omakra, the Torah says in Chalita, he also Yevimto Ashara. She'ein Talmud Lomer Yevimto. It says the word Yevimto at the beginning of the pasuk. Why did I have to repeat it here? L'lamdenu shedafka stam Yevama sheba diber akosiv harei hi tluya b'ratzon haYavam. V'im hu rotzeh hu miyavma. V'im lav harei hi choletzes lo. Avol yesh l'cha Yevama achas. She'ola l'chalitza v'eina ola yibu. V'eza hi chayvei lavim. So normally the Yovam has a choice, either Yibum or Chalitza. But there's a miyud here in the pasuk Yevimto, because the word Yevimto is superfluous. We already have it at the beginning of the pasuk, and it's coming to exclude a Yevama achas sha'ola l'chalitza, even though Eina ola Yibum, which is pretty mind-boggling. You can have someone who has Chalitza, but she's not in the parsha of Yibum. The Ezo, he, can you quote to me an example? And that's going to be Chayvei Lavim. So the Gemara asks the obvious question: Chayvei Krisus. How do you know it's referring to Chayvei Lavim? And the Gemara answers, "Amakravim lo yachota each lakacha says Yevimto v'yolsu Yevimto ashara for Chalitza." The mashmos of this pasuk is that we're talking about someone that chafetz miyabim. If he would have only wanted yibum, he could be miyabim. He's called ola liyibum ola chalitza. The culture eino ola yibum eino ola chalitza. We're talking about chayve krisus, and there's no yibum, and they patter up the tzara from chalitza, and therefore we cannot interpret Yevimto to teach us that there is a Yevama that even though she's not muteris liyibum, nevertheless she gets chalitza. No one could fit that category.
What's the whole logic of having to have chalitza if you're not materid for yibum?
In other words, if there's no yibum, then it means there's no zika, and there's no chalitza as well.
Right.
So when the Torah says in lo yachpota ish lakachas, etc., and then we also yivim kashara lechalitza, that's because he had the option of being miyabim. Because the pasuk starts with lo yachpota ish lakachas as yivim. So apparently he had such an option. He opted for a chalitza. Okay, fine. But someone who's not ola lechalitza, I'm sorry, someone who's not ola, if she's not ola leyibum, she's not ola lechalitza as well. There's no zika yibum.
Right.
So when we get to chayve krisus, and there's no yibum in chayve krisus, and yet the so could that be a case with which would apply under the drashas Yevimto, that there is a Yevama that even though she's not liyibum, nevertheless she is ola lechalitza. He writes here, "V'imkein behechrech shelo alem nidrash yevimto hamalamdenu sheyesh yivama shafal pisheino liyibum mikom kov ola hi lechalitza." Once we've established the principle called ola liyibum ola chalitza, ain't ola liyibum, ain't ola chalitza, then we cannot interpret this drasha in the case of chayve krisus to say that there's no yibum, but she's ola lechalitza. We'll just review this last drasha, this last Yalfusa, to teach us that there's no need for chalitza once there's a ptur and an exclusion of yibum, and this we derive from im lo yachpot each lakacha says yivimto. He had the option of yibum. Then, if he decides against yibum, we also yivim tachara for chalitza. But if he didn't even have an option of yibum, for example, chayve krisus, then ena ola lechalitza is a ptur of chalitza. And he writes him came behechrek shalo lehen nidrash yevimto hamalamdenu sheyesh yivama shafal pishenu liyibum mikom kamola hila chalitza. So it's not in reference to chayve krisus that we darshan the word yevimto to teach us that there is chalitza even without yivama, even without yibum as an option. Yihachi, so Gemara raises the following objection. If this klal of kol she'ena ola b'yibum ein ola chalitza is something that we accept, we should accept it straight across the board, even for chayve lav nami. And there should be no need or requirement of chalitza in the case of chayve lav, because the Yibum itself is not an option. The Gemara answers no. You can't make an exact equation here between Yibum and Chalitza. Rabbi Rachmana, the Torah was marbe Chalitza, based on the pasuk Yevimto, that there is a Yevamot that's Ola Chalitza, even though she's not Ola Yibum. So it's not an absolute clear rule that if there's no option of Yibum, then mitzvah fact there's no option of Chalitza, Umara Isa. So why do you exclude Chayve Lavim from Chalitza, based on the pasuk Lo Yachvotz Lakachas, and yet from the pasuk Yevimto you're being marbe that Chayve Lavim require Chalitza. And here we take a look at Chaf Amud Beis, and the Gemara says the following.